Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, let's enter in. Give me some indication that's right for your body that you can see that this is Unlearning with Lindsay T.H. Jackson, and you see that sharing on your screen. Today, we're going to be talking about unlearning patriarchy in parenting and partnership. I don't know about you, but I am like totally here to get all of my dating advice because I need some information because I'm trying to be out here dating men in their 40s and maybe early 50s. So yeah, well, let's introduce the panel so you can understand who I'm getting advice from. First, a little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't already and it would serve you, you can activate your captions just by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen, looking for that CC button. You can even change the language so that it is being interpreted into a different language. We have live ASL interpretation as always. Welcome to Lavender and David. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't read our community guidelines, please take a moment. We really work to set, maintain, and hold a space for you where learning and, if we're lucky, transformation can take place. And what you bring to this community is as important as what we hope to impart in this community. So have a read of those if you haven't already. We will be recording. Unfortunately, you are not going to be on the recording, even if you're on screen. It's only going to be those who are on the panel unless we invite you up at the end to ask a question. So what that means is that you can actually come onto camera. I don't care if you got rollers in your hair, you didn't do your hair, you're picking your nose. I still want to see you. What's the benefit of being live together if I don't get to see your beautiful face? But you're not going to be in the final recording. I'm sorry. Maybe when you're on the panel. Do you want to be on the panel? Send us a message. I would love for you to be on the panel. What's the topic? We'll discuss later. At the end, we're going to send you a reflection prompt. Please take a moment to give us some feedback. We really value every single word, every single comment, and we use that to inform each episode. Lots of exciting things coming up in the year ahead. As always, our pro bono partners at, wait, I said that wrong. Our ASL partners are pro bono ASL. It's just now that's in my head. When I think ASL interpretation, I think pro bono. And I certainly hope that that is who you think. Please follow up with them if you are looking to increase the accessibility in your online events or in-person events. Check out Sojourn DEI if you haven't already. We built this specifically for small and mid-sized businesses that many of you are a part of or are running. This is a way to get your DEI and organizational design work really underway at a price that is suitable for small and mid-sized businesses. Check it out today. You ready? Let's put our hands together or on our heart or in our headspace or in your gut, whatever feels right for you. And let's take a deep inhale in and a deep exhale out. We found our way here. We're winning today. Oh my goodness, look at this panel. Unlearning patriarchy in parenting in partnership. There's so much for us to discuss here. Welcome, Mr. Chaz Lewis. Mr. Chaz is an educator turned social media sensation who's redefining leadership, parenting, and teaching. I'm following them on Instagram, but you can follow them on your platform of choice. Chaz Lewis stumbled into teaching for a paycheck, but stayed for the passion, discovering a knack for igniting curiosity and possibility in kids. Chaz's philosophy, Mr. Chaz's philosophy is it's all about consciousness, joy, and dignity. Something, for some reason, I don't know, is that what our education system is still thinking, Mr. Chaz? I don't know. Consciousness, joy, and dignity. His ideas have exploded beyond the classroom, resonating with parents, personal development enthusiasts, and organizational leaders alike. Everybody take a moment and welcome Mr. Chaz. Mr. Chaz, I think the best place for us to start today is what's patriarchy? That's like a big Jeopardy word. What is patriarchy, Mr. Chaz?
Yeah, well, I would say this is Mr. Chaz. Starting with this is Mr. Chaz. And I would say that it is really, it depicts and defines how men and males have kind of been in control and set the uh, really set the rules for society. If I were to
Mm,
say it in a concise way, that is how I would define it. And it's not something that only impacts males, obviously, it impacts everyone in society.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, this is going to be a good discussion. Let's get Professor Neil Shaminsky up on this stage as well. Professor Neil is a Canadian American who's turning superhero studies into a serious discipline, naming my bias there that clearly Mr. Chaz, Professor Neil is going to be nicer than you and I are, but you know, whatever. Based at Cambrian College, Neil brings a unique blend of social and political thought, English literature, and language teaching to his work. His research, it's a fascinating mix of gender studies, pulp culture, with a soft spot for Caped Crusaders, I absolutely love that, and Canadian nationalism. Professor Neil is not just another talking head in the ivory tower, he's got the publishing cred to back it up with articles in the International Journal of Comic Art and Men and Masculinities. He's even co-edited a book of Canadian pop culture, because why should America have all the fun? Why should America have all the fun, Professor Neil? Are we having fun? Is that the assessment that's happening up in Canada? Is that what, I'm not sure that that's what we're doing down here. Professor Neil, can you expand on Mr. Chaz's definition? How would you define patriarchy?
Well, this is Neil, and you're certainly starting with the big questions, aren't you?
I mean, we wouldn't want to mix up the show too much.
Right, right. Yeah, no softball questions just to get us rolling, huh? Um, yeah, I mean, Mr. Chaz did an excellent job with his answer. I think the important detail that I like to add that is maybe not obvious when people ask this question, especially people who are just coming to sincerely asking questions like, "What is patriarchy?" is not only is it this interconnected system of institutions, organizations, even just etiquette, culture that upholds male dominance. But it's also a system that restricts and limits and hurts all of us in
Mm,
some manner or another. Even men who are trying to access power and privilege through patriarchy do so by cutting off some piece of themselves, by constraining who they are, what they can say, what they can feel or express. Um, and so what I always like to emphasize is that patriarchy is a tiny little box that requires you to squeeze who you are into and fit that exact shape, even if you are trying to extract the benefits from it. You do so at the expense of self-harm.
oof. This is Lindsay. You do so at the expense of self-harm. Um, Question for both of you, Mr. Chaz, maybe you can start. In what ways or how or when did you start to notice the ways that patriarchy was limiting and defining and constraining you? Do you remember some of those first moments of revelation?
It is whether it's something that I kind of maybe not always, but for a very long time from very early memories had a sense of, even if I didn't have the words to describe it.
Mm,
It's, you know, even in just how we talked to each other as peers, as kids, as young as, elementary school, and what was okay and what was not okay. Kind of had that sense and not fully understanding it or how to process it or where I should go with it. Is this something I need to fight against or conform with? And it's something that really glaringly, as I started working with children,
mm,
became more and more evident and more of a challenge to overcome, because it felt like no matter, no matter what situation I was experiencing in the classroom, what I was trying to overcome or work through, that patriarchy had some role to play in it. Um, in, in so many different ways, in the ways that people saw me as an educator, in the ways that I saw myself as an educator, in the ways that I saw the children, in the ways that the children even communicated with each other about, like, girl colors and boy colors, and what, is accept what boys can do and what girls can do. And you can't do that because you're a girl, and you can't do that because you're a boy. And it's something that I recognized, in children. Sometimes we see children play out the things that adults are doing. And for some reason, it's so much more obvious that it's wrong when we see children do it than when we see it when our own peers, when we see it in our own society with our peers. So to answer your question more concisely, it's something that has impacted me throughout my life, and I've had a sense of from my earliest memories. But it wasn't until I started working with children, and this is still kind of like older teens, maybe like 19. It wasn't until I started working with children that I really recognized how pervasive it was and how much of a problem it is at all stages of life.
Yes. This is Lindsay. Professor Neal, I see you nodding your head at everything Mr. Chaz is saying. Go ahead. What's coming up?
Yes. So this is Neil. Um, I think that I came to my own recognition, of course, not yet knowing that it was called patriarchy, from a very young age, frankly. As a child, it's difficult to know now because as an adult, I should say, I'm 6'1". I'm a long distance runner. I'm athletic. But as a child, I was always the tiniest boy in my class. We would line up by height. I knew exactly where to go to the beginning of the line.
Hmm.
And I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And the most devastating insult that any boy could deliver to another boy when I was growing up was to call them gay.
Hmm.
I heard that a lot as a little, um, you know, nerdy boy. I was into comic books. It's one of the reasons why I study them now. Um, so I knew very well how one has their masculinity attacked. Their hold on what sort of power was available to boys even then. Um, and so I also learned as a consequence, because I was that nerdy, sociable little boy, um, that the way to access power was through bullying. And so if people bullied me to prove their bona fides as a masculine boy, then I could prove my own by learning from their behavior and targeting somebody else.
Hmm.
And this wasn't something that I think I was doing consciously, but it was pointed out to me, and I was probably only 11, 12 years old, when my mom received a phone call from the principal of my school saying that boys had been picking on me, but that my mother shouldn't worry because I could give as good as I got with my words, which was reassuring to hear at the time, except that then I had to sit and mull over exactly what that meant, because I was meeting that fire, that poison, with the same. I didn't yet know how to attempt to neutralize or push back against that sentiment, and so instead it was, well, if this is the weapon of choice, then I got to know how to use it too.
Hmm.
And then it's not until I am introduced to concepts like feminism in high school, that I realize, oh, wait, there is a whole different option, another vocabulary, an entirely different philosophy that can be employed here to respond. I don't just have to be as awful as they are in order to prove, that I am masculine. I too am on the path to being a man. There's some other alternative route that's available.
This is Mr. Chaz, and I just want to kind of chime in and add to that it's since it's so culturally pervasive, it almost becomes like the default. And until you learn a different way to respond, a different way to see things, a different way to see yourself and to kind of work through that yourself, the default is that toxic masculinity is like, how can I then overpower this other person? How do I dominate this other person to kind of get what I want and improve my social standing or my status? And it's a tricky cycle because the it's we have to have children have to have examples of adults who can speak that language, who can respond to the dominance in a way that's not trying to control the other person or trying to strike fear in the other person to get what we want. And there are not a lot of those examples. And there are not a lot of those examples in the classroom a lot of the times, which is where a lot of these social dynamics are playing out, and we're learning about, how to survive socially in this world. And the reason why I say it's a cycle, because I also, a part of what I think makes it part of the reason why I think there are less men in especially early education, is because there are so many feelings involved. There's so much nurturing involved. And that's not something that a lot of us men are used to, don't really know what to do with when emotions happen. Like we shove it away, we'll punish it, we'll abandon it, we'll do all these kinds of things. And we have a hard time of really responding empathetically to it. And don't have a lot of examples of it. And so we're not in the classroom doing it. And so they're often not getting a lot of examples. And our fathers are often just as lost as a lot of times they don't even know that there's a cycle to be broken. So it is a very tricky, culturally pervasive cycle that continues to happen.
This is Lindsay. I mean, you're bringing up something here that I think is so important for us not to miss. Whenever we hear this language of toxic masculinity or combating rape culture, it always seems to be this story of these nasty, feminist women who are pushing this agenda. And yet, have you found in your research and your work that those who have been cultured as women, identify as women, are also teaching patriarchy to their children, sons, daughters, non-binary, that they are also keeping this system intact? And what does that look like?
This is Mr. Chaz, and I would say yes, we all sometimes are cogs in the system, and some of us may have bigger roles to play than others. And one of my experiences where it's very clear is just I remember the first time I became, and I've actually been having this conversation online, so I know it's not just my experience. I remember the first time I was becoming a lead teacher at a new school where they didn't know me, and they knew they were going to get a new teacher, and they were like, okay, we know we're going to get a new teacher, we're ready for that. And then they put a sign on the door and it said, Mr. Chaz is going to be coming in the classroom. And the reaction, there was a big reaction to it where a lot of parents want to take their child out of the school. They did not want their child to be taught by a Mr. Chaz. And I'm understanding and even more empathetic of that now, even more than I was at the time, uh, these are women who've likely been hurt by men. And so that is what maybe is coming up, or maybe it's even indirect trauma of just hearing about it, knowing that it happens. And so I understand and I get the reaction. And it is, if we don't have men, if we don't allow men to be in these nurturing roles, the few that we have, because there's very few of us, especially in early childhood, very few of us in elementary. There tends to be more when you get to older children in higher education. But if we don't support men in this nurturing role and celebrate it, then we're kind of being a part of this same system that isn't going to allow little boys and little girls to see what a nurturing man, a caring, empathetic man looks like. And, again, I'm very empathetic of the reaction. I've been having conversation online where people have been sharing, they felt safe enough to say, hey, they follow me. They get advice from me to use with their children. And still, when a male is in the environment or working with their child, they have a gut reaction of just like, why is this grown man want to be around kids? Right. And so, and the people who were messaging me said, like, that was my gut reaction. And then I had to kind of check myself and say, like, okay, well, maybe this isn't such a bad thing. Right. And so there's kind of that. And that's what I encourage people to do. Like, you're not going to be able to necessarily control that gut reaction. And I understand why that gut reaction is there. And keep thinking and keep reflecting about maybe the power, and maybe turn that into curiosity, into maybe get to learn more about this particular person who is going to be in this room, and see if this particular person is a helpful role model. Because at the same time, there's been many, man or woman, I've worked with just as many women who use kind of more of the dominating fear and control based methods that are a sign of just a feature of patriarchy, an intricate part of patriarchy. So really get to know that individual person. The gut reaction may happen. Take a breath, get to know the person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This
Neil?
is Neil. Yes, and so picking up on the last note that Mr. Chaz was making, and also getting back, Lindsay, to your question that prompted that response. Just as patriarchy is this constraining box that forces us to limit ourselves. It can also be used to the benefit of people of any and all genders, right? It doesn't only benefit men. And so, as Mr. Chaz was just describing, that fear-based approach to parenting, or to discipline, perhaps, is something that patriarchy can give mothers as well, as a tool to exert control or influence, to produce the desired response, and not just in their children, but in society in general, right? Patriarchy, because, and I believe Mr. Chaz used this word earlier, being the default, means that it can be much easier to move through the world, and relying on those patriarchal scripts that we have been taught, because we know, for example, if you are a parent of a small child in public shopping, for instance, that if you are harsh in your discipline of unruly behavior, that's much less likely to earn you dirty looks, or even a vocal response from strangers, than if they perceive you to be too accommodating, too gentle in your parenting. And then people will speak to you, they will criticize you, they may even record you, because your child is simply expressing emotions that they have difficulty describing or regulating. But if you tell them, stop that, that's inappropriate. If you are even harsher, that's sort of a disciplinary response, textbook patriarchy. But you'll receive some sort of social reward for that. And so patriarchy does also come with those rewards, and those can be accessed by a variety of people. So I think this is a useful moment for us to recognize that as well. If patriarchy were only offering penalties, it would be very difficult to see why it has this broad appeal, why it has this staying power. And so we also have to acknowledge that people see a way to work the system to their benefit as well.
Yeah, yeah. As you all are sharing, I just keep being reminded of, and we're always talking, we should just call this the Leticia Nieto show, because again, I'm reminded of her model where we're looking at the center in a circle, we have ourselves or true power or source. And then at the outer layer, there's character play, which we are taught to do from a very young age. You're taught to play masculine, play feminine, play blackness, play whiteness, whatever. And then at the next level, we have status play, which is that constant attempt to one-up one another. And there's different ways that we play status, and the clothes that we wear, dropping the school that we went to, dropping our title, blah, blah, blah. And all the ways that these larger systems, like patriarchal systems, are attempting to navigate character and status play, because in the end, we as a human just want to feel empowered, right? We want to feel as though we have choice or agency. And I think one of the things about patriarchy is that it teaches us that power is meant to be over as opposed to with, right? It kind of negates the idea that I can have empowerment at the same time, at the same level as you do, as opposed to that either I have power or you have power, but we can't both have it. And so that manipulation is always something that we are being taught to, in big and small ways, try to one-up one another. You know, we are not talking about very light things in general. So there's patriarchy, but when we talk about parenting, about partnership, everybody has an opinion, right? When I said today, we're gonna be talking about parenting and partnership, everybody went, oh, damn. you just gotta be right in there, Lindsay, because you know, I want to name, I have my own biases, as you're talking about, Neil, when I see people out and, you know, certain behaviors. And I, again, from that status play point, right, before I check my ego, I might go like, well, there's good research to suggest why what you're doing is not good parenting, right? How, what, right? You're an early childhood educator, Mr. Chaz. Neil, you're, you know, researching this all the time. What are some of the things that you are teaching people that want to raise, how about we say it that way, that want to raise or nurture humans who have their source of power come from within, not from external things? How are you coaching other men on how to be in partnership in a way that is power with as opposed to power over? What's your advice to them?
Yeah, oh, so much. One of the common phrase that I find myself saying often is the only person you can control is yourself. Because a lot of times when we start the conversation, or I'm in a coaching role or in a consulting role, and we're talking about what the, you know, what the challenge is, what the problem is, it is like, how do I get this person? How do I make this person? How do I, and really what they're speaking to, whether they're conscious of it or not, is how do I control this person and get them to do what I want? And what I try to coach instead is, how do you recognize what's in your control of what you can do, and yeah, make your own choices. How do you regulate your own body and your own triggers? How do you use clear, assertive communication? And, how do you use empathy in a way where you're not taking over, or you're not dismissing them or punishing them. These are things. How do you see the best in the other person? How do you, and also recognizing that we're all on this journey. We're all on different parts of our journey, and we're
Mm.
really respecting and honoring that. And, another thing sometimes where I tend to do is just to really help people tap into recognize their own journey. That you may be here now, you may have read all the books now and have this knowledge and say, well, actually, research is saying, but you didn't always know that. Right. And so, there was a point in time where maybe there was a challenge that you had, and you had to go out and research so that you could get to that point.
Mm.
And even with all of the research and all of the like your willingness, and you want to do this and you want to create this collaborative and connection based relationship environment, you want to move away from fear and control, and you're 100% invested, you still mess up. You still make mistakes. And so really honoring that is what I try to do and focus on when I'm working with people, and their that default goes into control mode.
Yeah, this is Lindsay. Before I want to stick on that for a second, because as a parent of two small humans, I find one of the most challenging things is how much I beat myself up when I think I get it wrong, right? What should I say to myself in those moments, guys? Give me a line, give me a word.
I'm going to give you a couple. So one, this is Mr. Chess. And I've been making this mistake kind of throughout this of not saying this is Mr. Chess. And so I'm just going to acknowledge and hold space for that and use this opportunity to practice. And so OOPS just stands for our opportunity to practice skills. It's an
Mm,
acronym, right? So when you OOPS,
mm,
just know you don't have to beat yourself up. You don't have to shame yourself. Just an opportunity to practice skills. And recognizing that mistakes are an essential part of the learning process. You can't take the mistakes out of the learning process. They're needed, they're necessary. And another one that I, tell myself all the time is to avoid being a perfectionist, being an improvementist. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve just a little every day. And so even the fact that you're recognizing that you made that mistake, you made that oops, there's probably a time when you might not have even recognized that as a mistake. So even the fact that you're recognizing that, take a breath, recognize, oops, I made a mistake, and then just plan on what we can do better next time, how you're going to approach it next time. That acronym could also change to oops can also stand for our opportunity to problem solve.
mm, mm, mm. Amy Davies is on the call. Can we make like 4 shirts? Then I just somebody got it. Thank you. Passing that note on. Neil, what's coming up for you? This is Lindsay. Neil, what's coming
Yeah.
up?
Wow. This is Neil. I'm torn between wanting to respond and riff off of what Mr. Chaz is saying, and also to go back to the original prompt. I think I'll go back to that prompt actually. Um, One of the things that I like to express in here, this would be to my students or to people on my various social media channels. I don't do one-on-one work myself, and so I'm usually speaking from a place even online that is similar to the where I would be speaking from, and the sort of audience I'm speaking to, I imagine, is like my classroom. Uh, and what I like to stress is there is no one way
Mm,
that healthy relationships, partnerships look or operate. That there is no ideal form that we are trying to capture or practice. And one of the reasons that I stress that is that it is very much in opposition to the sort of advice that you get from these manosphere life coaches, dating coaches, who all have the secret recipe. And of course, all of these secret recipes are incredibly similar, which emphasize things like control, just as Mr. Chaz was saying. It's very much about being in the driver's seat of your relationship and getting, this partner to do exactly what you require of them. And so I ask people to take a step back, expressing that this is not going to be easy or necessarily straightforward. It is an iterative process. So the oops very much applies. We are going to make mistakes. And in fact, what may work for your relationship with one person may be completely counterproductive with another. So we can't even rely on what has worked in the past as a secret key to moving forward. I'm noticing that even with my second daughter is 3 months old. The number of times I have tried to problem solve, because I kept a journal with my first daughter in her infancy, by just doing what I did the first time and quickly realizing that does not work. Sometimes it does, and what a relief when it does. But no, it's like, okay, we got to try, well, let's try the opposite. No, that doesn't work either. And try 2 or 3 or 4 different strategies before landing on something that appears to work. And that goes for most of our relationships, frankly. And we can't even stick with the same thing with the same person necessarily for years on end, because we continue to grow in all sorts of directions, whether we're growing up, growing down, growing sideways. People change and our dynamics change, and we have to be constantly observing and reflecting and communicating as we become aware of changes in those dynamics. It's the observation piece for me is always very big, because it is so easy to become complacent when you think you have it figured out. And you do, until the moment when you realize, oh, things changed and I wasn't watching. I wasn't paying attention. And frankly, this has led to the end of friendships that I've had. It was a factor in the end of my first marriage. When you stop and you realize, like, oh, and I'll share this one little comment that our couples therapist made at the end of this first marriage, when she asked us to describe one another to her. And she looked at both of us and said, the person that each of you has described is not the person that I have met and have gotten to know through these sessions. Not saying that means that you are wrong or that you are lying, but it does seem to suggest that the person that you are married to now is not the person that you think they are or that they were. So that was quite rambling, I realize. But that observation piece for me is huge, because there is no one-size-fits-all approach between people, but even when we consider a relationship with the same person over time.
Yeah. This is Lindsay. I don't know about the rest of you in this room, but I'm just so physically uncomfortable. It's all that I'm like, from my insides, I want to name how much I just struggled to be present while you two were speaking, because when something is hitting you and it's just so uncomfortable, as a new level of awareness is beginning to butt up and you want to just run and escape and do anything but continue to be present in that moment. And that's what's coming up for me. So, fuck the rest of you. Like, one, it's the control. It's just how much we are taught to be moving moment by moment, trying to have a semblance of control, right? Irregardless of our gender. And that mirror again and again, when I think about within being a parent, within being in partnership, even when I think I'm being so like, oh, I'm just so evolved and everything, it's that quick. Am I playing evolved again so that I can be in control? And that need for control, whether it's within the construct of patriarchy, whether it is in the construct of our dominant white cultural norms and standards, we are all taught that to be in relationship into another is to get to some sense of, well, I can be safe because I now know the parameters and I am in control. And allowing that control to be, what's the word for it, right? It doesn't exist. It's a figment of our imagination. I feel like this is not gender specific, and I feel like we really culture young boys that this is what they are meant to be doing to be masculine. Is that right? Do you feel that too, Mr. Chaz?
Yeah, this is Mr. Chaz, and I definitely see that. I think we focus a lot on other control as opposed to self-control. And
Mm,
and you know, someone may have said something or done something that impacted us in a way. And a lot of what we, even traditional parenting styles, traditional leadership styles are just like, how do you kind of get back at that person? How do you control and make this other person do this thing? Um, and so it's just figuring out. I mean, and it's becoming more, I would say, more and more available, but still not as available as I would like it to be. Just figuring out how do we actually deal with all of that? How do we deal with the feeling of not being in control? When you might want to feel control because you want to experience some kind of safety. And so how do you feel safe within yourself so you don't, without having to control what everything is happening around you? And what I found on my journey as I've been practicing this, and children are such a great, they give you so much practice. They give you so many opportunities to make mistakes and oops and to practice. And really any close relationship does. Um, but the children are so just present and just being kind of that themselves. They're still haven't been as tainted by this, kind of the mask that we tell them to put on, and they're still impacted by it, but they're not as much as us adults who've had years and years of trying to assimilate into this patriarchal culture and this fear control based culture. And so on my journey is I've been kind of practicing this self-control and not controlling everything that happens in my environment is it's a difficult journey. I make mistakes all the time, all along the way. I catch myself even as someone who's trying to practice this stuff and trying to, preaching and practicing connection and collaborative based practices as opposed to fear and control based practices. Even as this person, even as that character who I see myself as, uh, I'm still making mistakes and still just reminding myself and talking to myself and having another voice that I have created. That's not my default. The default comes up automatically. That inner voice that says punish or abandon or control
mm,
or make them do something still comes up. It's just now I am training and learning another voice to talk to myself. And I practice this for anyone who is interested, is in the classroom or parenting. I practice this framework called conscious discipline. And we the way that we kind of talk about this inner voice is like that CD-ROM that's been downloaded onto us. And we've updated it to like, it's the playlist now because who does the CD-ROM anymore? And so is we have this playlist that has been downloaded onto us, the patriarchal greatest hits,
Mm,
and it still plays, but what we can practice doing, and I think I heard you when you said, "Hey, can you give me some other words, something else to say to myself?" Is you can download new songs in that playlist. You can add more songs, and now those old songs, I feel like they never go away. Those old songs are always there on that playlist. But what happens is when you push shuffle, it's more likely you're going to get one of those connection and collaborative based songs as opposed to those fear and control based songs. And when one of those fear and control based songs do come up, you just hit skip. You recognize it, hit skip, and likely one of those other, you can choose what song you want to play. Hey, OOPS stands for Our Opportunity to Problem Solve. Q-tip stands for Quit Taking It Personally, or whatever it is. You have a whole nother greatest hits that you can play to help you respond in the situation in a way that is going to be more helpful, in a way that's more intentional, in a way that spreads and teaches also children, because children do what they see, right? We can practice, we can tell them to have self-control, don't control others, but if they see us doing it, then they're gonna repeat what they see us doing, right? And
yes.
so just by us recognizing that song on our playlist, that old song that we didn't put on there, pushing skip and playing a new song and responding in a different way, we can now download new songs, more helpful songs, more connection, collaborative based songs on this new generation, and they can kind of pass those same songs on to not just the next generation in the future, but to each other in the now.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. This is Lindsay. I love that. Um, I love that. And I'm sure everybody is writing that down right now, right? What is your playlist? And do you have a mix of songs on there so that it's not all just that original social conditioning? I'm just reminded one of the things I've been working with my children on is taking in the book, what is it? Bell Hooks's, is it Communion or All About Love? I think it's All About Love. She pulls a quote that defines 5 different ways that these actions kind of all add up to love, because we don't have a universal definition of love. And one of the things I've been doing with my children is asking them, how have you shown one of these actions that add up to love, right? Whether it's respect or nurture or taking time to spend time with me or your brother or your father, right? Like, what are the actions that you are taking that by themselves would say, oh, yes, those amount to love, as opposed to just, I love you. And I love you just hanging out there without any verbs attached to it. Because it can be a feeling, but often we, in relationship with one another, in community, we are looking for love to be an action word, something that we are giving of our time, of our attention. Joe Ferris, I was with him and his wife recently, and I asked them, how would you define love? And he said, I, at this stage in my life and in my marriage, define it as you are willing of me being, or you are worthy of me being interrupted. Right? In the course of my life, you're worthy of me being interrupted. And oh, I just love that. Neil, what's coming up for you?
This is Neil. Wow. Sorry, there's just there are so many great things being shared and said right now. When Mr. Chaz was talking about the playlist metaphor, the one that I often share, it's a very similar sort of metaphor, is an idea of scripts. So we are in possession of various scripts that we have learned, that we may have grown up with, we may have acquired along the way. But we struggle to to read off of anything that we have not already read, that we haven't internalized, right? So we need to add new scripts to the mix. But we also, and I think this has to do with control and safety, there's a comfort in sticking with a script. You've said something, I know what the correct response is. So I'm going to go through my files, I'm going to identify the correct response, and I'm going to feed that to. And so what I also like to suggest is that it's not just about acquiring new scripts. So talking to the right people, reading the right books. It's also learning to improvise. And so, okay, let's develop our ability to work without any script at all, to be responsive to our partner in a way that is more organic and authentic. And this is actually a sort of metaphor that I've only come to recently in life, because my wife is an actor and she trained in improv. And so we've always had this wonderful conversation about how our love language, as it were, is yes anding one another. So when one of us is being, frankly, like silly, absurd, you just roll with it. And that being an effective way of actually problem solving and communicating when less silly situations arise. Like I'm going to accept the premise, the truth of what it is that you're feeling and you're experiencing right now, and we're going to build on that. I'm not going to question the validity or the legitimacy of what it is you're experiencing. We accept that, yes. And let's build on it. Let's see where we can go from there. And that often requires a great deal of discomfort. Being okay with experiencing discomfort and not running to grab one of those scripts that you've learned, that you know is the solution to the problem at hand. Like, no, we're going to acknowledge that every situation is unique, and that this doesn't necessarily call for the same solution as in the past. Let's let's improvise. Let's see where that takes us. Is it going to be stressful? Am I going to be uncomfortable? Almost certainly.
Yeah.
But that's how we learn. That's how we grow.
This is Lindsay. What's coming up for me as we attempt poorly to wrap this up before we get into question and answer is somebody here today is realizing that either a partner or a parent, a teacher, somebody, an important relationship in their life, they're realizing that person was so deeply conditioned in a patriarchal system, and that's all they knew to keep them safe, to survive within this system. Whether it's your father, whether it's your husband, whether it's your brother, whether it's your whatever. They're realizing now that that person didn't know any other way. That was what they were taught. It was to be a man. That was the man code. And they thought they were doing manness well. What's your message for them?
Well, this is Neil. It is okay to have complex, contradictory, and even ambivalent feelings, especially about the people that we love. To acknowledge that they were doing what they learned and they thought they were doing right, because given the tools and the techniques that they had available, they would say that this was the best they could do. And at the same time, we can also acknowledge, like, well, that wasn't good enough, and it wasn't enough for me. I needed something more. And sometimes we simply have a mismatch with the people that we love, right? There's a misalignment. And wow, that's where after recognizing that's where the really difficult work begins, right? And sometimes the work just isn't going to carry us through that relationship may have gone as far as it can. But wow, yeah, we're getting into some very heavy material at that point, and like I said earlier, there's no one size fits all approach. There's no standard solution there.
Yeah.
This is Mr. Chaz. Yes, and you may have, done the best you could. I actually 100% believe that you did the best that you could with the skills, knowledge, and resources you had access to in that moment. You had some stuff on your CD-ROM, on your playlist, and it's still playing. And I can recognize how that's impacted you, can recognize how that's impacted me. And I'm at a place now where I can also recognize what my needs are and what I need. And so sometimes it's hopefully you have the skills to have a conversation with whoever this person and whoever you're in a relationship with. And hopefully they have the willingness to be open to learn and be flexible and to be wrong and to feel uncomfortable throughout the process. And there's often a mismatch there. There is often, those things often don't line up. And it is okay to say that this is for me to be in a relationship with you, this is what I need. And when I think about like boundaries, uh, I think about communicating, and especially when I teach children, I teach them to say, hey, I don't like it when you blank, please blank instead, right? And this is a way to say, this is how I want to stay in relationship with you. This is what I need to stay in a relationship with you. And if it doesn't, if you're not able to do that, and I may not be able to stay in a relationship with you. And I now at this point know this about myself. And maybe I gotta come back later to this. Maybe I gotta come back in a month or in a year where I have some better language to maybe communicate to you, or maybe your willingness has increased, or maybe I've built more skills for that self-control, because it can be very easy. Remember, just because we've gotten to a certain place on our journey doesn't mean we're going to be perfect at communicating this to the other person. And we might fall into the default, start playing the same songs that they're playing. And we're just having, we're just bumping the same music at each other and not really hearing each other. And no one that relationship has the skills to solve the problem where everyone can have peace. So that is a reality that is difficult. It's challenging. A lot of emotions are going to happen as a result in that. And to speak to what I think both of you were saying earlier, of just learning to sit in the discomfort, learning to tolerate those uncomfortable emotions are such an essential skill that patriarchy doesn't really teach us. It's like, if you feel uncomfortable and you're triggered, then you need to change it by controlling the other person and make the other person stop. And instead, even that person feels upset by a boundary or something you said, and you feel confident, you're focusing on your self-control, allow them to feel that way. Allow them to be upset. Allow them to throw their temper tantrum. And know that that's okay. It's not a reflection. It's not something that you have to take personally. It's not something that means you're a bad person, or whatever it is that we're telling ourselves. That's often a result of that playlist that they probably conditioned, put on our playlist, continuing that cycle, just allowing it to be.
Yes.
Knowing your needs, communicating those needs, and allowing it to be.
Mm, mm. Yes, this is Lindsay. We have a question here. Um, um,
Sorry to interrupt, but this is Mr.
sorry.
Chaz, and I originally thought that I was going to have to leave at 5 o'clock, but I actually can stay till 5:30. So in terms of time, I am good. So
Very
go
good.
on.
Um, Lisa, did you want to come off of mute? I'm trying to interpret it and doing a poor job. Can you open up your mic and ask your question directly? Maybe.
Are you talking to me?
Did you have a question for Professor Neal or Mr. Chaz?
No, this was in relation to the survey
Oh,
that
okay.
been addressed, but thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me open it up to everyone. Did we have any questions that we wanted to direct directly to Professor Neal or Mr. Chaz? Feel free to open up your mic and ask them. Or if you'd like to place it in the chat, I will attempt to read it aloud for you. I'm scrolling here. Phyllis, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you so much for this amazing 1 hour. Both the panelists, you brought so much value and such deep commitment to really creating a new foundation on which folks can operate in a healthier way that is not patriarchy. So thank you to all three of you and to all the panelists. Delightful. I thought I would just pose this to both the panelists, and I'm always interested in hearing from my fellow listeners about the whole concept of adaptation. And so even for third, second, fourth generation, say people of African descent who are born in the US, born in Canada, we still bring memories because the body remembers, never forgets. And so my question is, I'm curious to hear from, again, the panelists, their thoughts, their insights on how displaced peoples adapt to their current environment and whether the environment was chosen by them for economic survival, escape from persecution or whatever, or if it's an environment that's a result of European imperialism. And just really curious because we bring our histories with us and then we're placed in a new environment and we take all of that to make sense of the current environment. So I'm just curious if folks could respond to that.
So that's a big question. This is Mr. Chaz. I will attempt to start us off here. What comes up for me as you were asking was a couple of things. One is still kind of learning, doing what you can to navigate the situation, whatever the situation is. And it could be so many, what you described could fit so many kinds of different situations. And, no one can take away your own skills as you're learning how to kind of navigate that self-control. No one can take away things like pausing and taking a breath. And that's something that you can take with you anywhere and not reacting in situations so that you can be more intentional and thoughtful about how you're navigating any kind of space. And I think if you're navigating a new space, it is going to take you, there's probably going to take a little bit more time to pause and to think because there's so many contextual things that you're thinking about. You're thinking about the context of your environment, and which is very likely very different than the context of the environment you're currently in. You're reading the room and what other people are seeing. And so really just pausing and taking a breath and knowing that you don't have to have that immediate like reaction or that script to to say something, I find to be helpful no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, unless you're in a situation where there is an imminent danger. Someone is coming for your life right now. That's the time to react, and your body will likely take over because your brain wants you to survive.
Mm.
The other thing that I thought about is, and I think this is probably a bigger piece, to be honest, is, but also can be more difficult. And you just have to do what you can, is to seek community and find community, because we're all we all need community. And I think that's part of what makes it so difficult to be displaced. And because you don't have your community.
Mm.
And so trying to seek out a new community, and luckily enough, I think we live in a time where yes, we might be disconnected in a lot of ways, but it's also more opportunities to get connected and to find people who have maybe similar contextual experiences, who can relate to what you're going through, and you can kind of talk through some of the challenges that you're experiencing. And it's always helpful to have a buddy, to kind of go through experiences. And when you don't have that community and you feel all alone, the weight is going to feel 100 times heavier and a lot harder. And so I do want to acknowledge this question, because I believe you're asking for a reason, and acknowledge the real challenge of navigating life without community.
Yeah.
And so those are the two big things I would say, is focus on what you can do for yourself and the things that you can still work on for yourself, and try to seek out community.
Yeah. This is Lindsay. If I can just pick up right where you left off, Mr. Chaz, even earlier, as as I was naming what was coming up for me in my ongoing journey of I work around control, and Mr. Chaz, as you were sharing it, I was having some connecting dots there in terms of, so one, I live at the intersection of a couple of target rank identities, right? Being Black and female, and then we call that misogynoir, right? Single mother, these things in themselves mean that on a subconscious level, I am going to be wanting to look for safety in the easiest path, because I'm in a system that is constantly targeting me. Add to that, as you're naming, Phyllis, the ways that being from a diaspora of displaced people, not being indigenous to this land, there is both cellular generational trauma that is reminding you, you are not safe in this space. Do what you can to try to control your environment, make yourself small, right? And then the physical somatic responses to try to draw in that control, because the target, can come from any direction. But I was recently reading something, and I just love this, that it was offering, hey, yeah, don't forget that if we've done all this research to prove that our bodies, our cells can pass down cellular trauma, then that means that we have also proved that it can pass down cellular knowledge.
Mm.
Right? And so I think there's something in there that I've been starting to meditate and write about the ways that, so if I breathe into the desire for control and allow that to dissipate, then I make space for ancestral knowledge to begin to enter in, and to offer to me what is the antithesis of control. What would that experience have been like for, in this case, my ancestors to be in their indigenous land, not feeling targeted, feeling safe? And so I think, or I offer that to say that I am also in that meditation, Phyllis, of, so if we can recognize the displacement and that impact on us, that means that we also have in that cellular knowledge the ability to recognize and to invite in that experience of not being displaced, of being indigenous too, of being safe. And that we have to, as Mr. Chaz is saying, take that breath long enough to allow that wisdom to appear and unfold. Is that useful at all?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the responses. And Professor Neil, I'd love to hear whether you'd love to comment on the question at all. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, this is Professor Neil, and I'm going to take a different approach because I can't speak from this same positionality, right? And instead say that I think that there's an opportunity here for those of us, like myself, who belong to white settler culture, to see where we can be supportive allies in these efforts. And Lindsay, you were talking about traditional and indigenous knowledges. Too often, and I need to be very conscious of this myself as a professor, as somebody with a lot of social and institutional power, just in my everyday life, of not rewarding people who have learned these scripts of colonial and imperial and white supremacist culture. And instead making space, again, for me to be uncomfortable by allowing people to instead bring their own unique traditional or indigenous knowledges and ways of communicating, ways of engaging, that are not strictly, I am chairing this meeting and we will announce ourselves and we will go through the motions in a way that makes me comfortable, because I am the one who has set the rules. And the only way that you will achieve your own power and assert your own control is by observing them well. So instead, acknowledging that this is not the only way to comport ourselves, to behave, to interact with one another, and expanding that space to accommodate a variety of approaches. Approaches that may confuse or unsettle or discomfort us, and at the same time, this is the only way that we can begin to reduce that influence and power and the control of those colonial strategies and scripts that we learned, that we internalized, perhaps even without realizing that we had done so, and making the space more open and inviting for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
This is Lindsay. Unfortunately, in that colonial Western playbook, I have to say we're at time. No, let's go sit around a table and eat and jerk chicken and lime rice and, wait until it just naturally feels like the conclusion. But unfortunately, we are bound by Western constructs of time in this moment. Thank you, everybody, as always, for being here, holding this space for myself, Neil, and Mr. Chaz to have this conversation together. And thank you for bearing witness to it. We send you on your way, imagining new possibilities, creating new ideas, and imagining imperfect, but what was the word? Betterisms. What was it, Amy? It was
You're talking about improvinist? You're talking about
improvinist ways of being. We'll see you next month, everybody. Bye.